Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Smoke, and I direct the American West Center here at the University of Utah. And it's my pleasure tonight to welcome you to our program, Navajo Voices on Bears Ears. Um, Before we begin tonight, I would like to thank our sponsors that include the J. Willard Marriott Library, the S.J. Quinney College of Law and the Stegner Center, the University of Utah College of Humanities, and the Utah State Historical Society, as well as the American West Center. It's really, I think this will be an important event, an important discussion. So I'm glad to see so many people out here this evening. Our panelists tonight, which you will meet in a more detailed way after the film, include Angela Baca, who is a doctoral candidate at New York University and is the filmmaker of the film Shash Jaa, which you will see shortly. Catherine Balzowski, who is the senior attorney at the Navajo Nation Department of Justice. Micah Daniels is a senior majoring in Native American Studies and minoring in education at Dartmouth College. Najon Mesa is the legal and policy director for Utah Dine Bikea, who has been deeply involved in the Bears Ears designation. And James Singer, who is the co-founder of the Utah League of Native American Voters and is a sociology doctoral candidate at Utah State University. And finally, you'll meet Farina King, who put this whole thing together. Farina is a PhD historian. She finished her degree at Arizona State University, and she now is an assistant professor of history at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And so you'll meet all of those folks after the film. But to begin, before we do anything else, I would like to invite Rose Jacob up to do a blessing for tonight's program.
John go not unlearned arts on it and Pekea hoppelndas anning arts on Kodoyat ehoban today kestoyat ehobaya del kitole Aronik edan lenny net arts ho. The Habstan London loyat ehoea Pekea kedat indot ishatel ishiat ehobikin eat ole aronda not unlearning bears on it arts ho kodo Nin Bekai Hanin Lahi. So by hit and it's and though if action leaning don't have the hand no dollars. It out adult is she and the bend up intention at a hoya. Ye dabzi lole donas. Ye de catole a cornicon no dollars did yet a hoy. You didn't eat dollars. Did ask for Jesus Christ, Bishop Nasha that didn't. Amen.
And so I think Farina will come up now and introduce the film. We'll watch that, and then we'll get into the panel discussion.
Yat-e. Hi, yat-e. Hello, everyone. I'm very grateful that you all came out and very grateful to our panelists. We will first jump into the film and Angelo Baca's film, Shash Jaa, Bears Ears, and that will be about 26 minutes long. And then we will follow with the panel, beginning with Angelo, and I will help transition all the speakers, and we will have time at the end and remaining part of this session for questions and answers. So, thank you, and we will start the film by Angelo Baca. the panelists to please come up now and take your seat at the front as we move to this part. Thank you. As Angelo's film shows, there are so many different perspectives and voices regarding Bears Ears. And even that film, there's many other perspectives, people from different backgrounds, different experiences. So this panel now, how it was organized was thinking about individuals who are emerging scholars who have researched and studied it, but also have personal connections to the Navajo Nation and the Nebekeya Navajo communities as well. And it's this panel, what I hope, is part of ongoing conversations that we seek to understand the different perspectives and voices on Bears Ears, but especially considering how some voices, they are marginalized or have been ignored for so long or overlooked for so long. And often what comes in conversations about panels like this is, are they balanced? Are they balanced conversations we have and panels? And I think there's always a tension of balance, but something to consider is how often, especially, I've been to many different institutions, academic institutions, that there already is an existing unbalance, a lack of balance in them, that you can go to any other class, whether it's math or science, and not hear, perspectives like these ones we may hear tonight. And so I think it is a great honor to have this group come together who have come from as far as Hanover area and one close by here, and thank them for that. And we'll start with hearing from Angelo, and I will be the timekeeper to make sure I'm going to be a little rude sometimes of hearing that way to make sure we are good on time and we can have opportunity to engage with each other and the panelists. So first from Angelo. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for being here today. I want to thank the organizers and the panelists, University of Utah, College of Law, American West Center, a lot of people who actually put work into this and got us together for this. I want to thank them and also acknowledge that we are still on indigenous land, that this is traditional Ute territory, and it's a very highly traveled place. A lot of tribes came here for salt at Salt Lake, and so many relationships still survive. And as a indigenous person, I really feel like, it's important to recognize who you are and what place you're in, and pay respects to the owners of the house. So, as you can see, this project is very personal. It's also tied within my own research in anthropology, the environmental, indigenous struggles, movements, articulation of science and storytelling, talking in different translations and filters of legality and history and culture. And these are my colleagues and peers, and all of them have a specialty and a focus in many of those areas. And so they're good storytellers. They can tell you from their angle, from their perspective. And so I'm honored to also be on this panel with them. And this particular project, I think, was very difficult, but it was very worth it. Coming from this place in San Juan County with my family and having ties all the ways to Bears Ears, we knew about it before it was in the news. We knew about it before it became a big deal amongst politicians, before it became a big deal in the federal, state, and local governments. And it was always special to us, and it was always sacred to us. And it was a little bit difficult to watch the film because it's coming up on a year when my grandmother passed. And she was essential to my being as a person and to my work as a scholar and a filmmaker. So, to me, this is it's an honor to do this work, and it's a privilege. It's a lot of responsibility. So I hope that we were able to communicate with you and connect how important Bears Ears is, how important our land is, how important our people are. And that this is a significant time because the question is posed back to you all now. How important is land to you? Are you willing to make the right decision and protect it for future generations? Or are we going to go down the wrong path and trade it in for money, which we know there's no continuation of that. There's no guarantee, and money is always spent and money always ends. So this is a really critical time right now because it's posed back to each and every one of you as citizens, but also as guests. You're still guests in Indigenous territory. You're still guests in our house. And we are honored to be a part of you in your lives, and we're even honored to invite you to come to Bears Ears, to take part of that responsibility and share in that story, but to come in a good and respectful way. And so if 5 tribes can lay down any of their previous struggles or battles with each other and take up a good conversation, a wonderful welcoming of everyone, then I think we can do that with everyone else here too. So the Bears Ears Coalition, all my elders, my colleagues, my relatives, they inspire me, they motivate me, they're my role models. You got to see it for yourself, the hard work they did. They just make it seem like it's what needs to be done. And so that's what I'm doing. So I want to take the time to acknowledge my mother, who's sitting right over there in the front. She's also instrumental. She's a mentor and a teacher as well, and helped to bring me up in the Navajo tradition as well. My grandmother raised me. My grandfather was very traditional. He was a storyteller. He was widely recognized in folklore circles, especially with the university up there in Ogden. And I just kind of realized one day that I'm actually doing the same thing that he used to do. I'm telling stories. I'm just using a different medium. So for now, I hope that the story that I'm telling is significant, that it reaches people, that you can understand it in a new and different way, get the story from the Indigenous perspective, get it from the people who are telling it to you, who live there, who know it, who have been steeped in that culture and language and are very, very close to it. Because you don't really get that in the paper. You don't really get that on the news. And you don't really get that when you go down to visit. But we're hoping that dialogue can happen, and we're hoping that connections can be made, because we're just barely starting to scratch the surface about the work that needs to be done. This is very beautiful and, promising, positive work. We're talking about a place of healing. And you have to broaden your mind about that. What kind of healing? What kind of healing do you need? There's mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. We need all of that kind of healing. And we need preventative maintenance. We can't just wait until it's too late. But land is essential to that. Our ancestors' burial places, the peace that they receive is essential to that. The recognition of the animals and the plants and the spirits that live there, that they have their own agency, their own energy, their own personality, and that we coexist with them. That's a part of that. And now you get to be a part of that story too, because you can be involved in helping to protect land. There's a discussion that needs to happen on a very personal level, but also to the very deepest part of how we want to decide about the future of our land and our nation. Because indigenous communities right now are facing very difficult times. All you need to look at the other indigenous struggles, Standing Rock, Mount Shasta with the Winnemem-Wintu, Mauna Kea, Hawaii, Bears Ears. This is only one story of many where there are indigenous struggles about the environment. But we don't think of it as the environment. We think of it as our relatives. They're a part of our family, and we got to take care of them. So I think it's a huge honor to be able to be here today with them. And I really want to share this time with other panelists and also be available to answer questions as well. And so thank you everybody for being here tonight. And I want to welcome you here tonight, but also invite you also to Bears Ears to come see it for yourself. See what we're talking about. Develop that relationship with the land, with the people, and understand what it is that we're trying to save, trying to protect, trying to defend. Because as of now, it's all of ours, and we should keep it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I apologize. I feel we would not be here, if it were not for our ancestors. So I left out introducing myself properly. She'e bilagana nishle do kiyani bashish chin bilagana dashache do sinijani dashanale akut ego atsa nishle. And my name is Farina King, and my mother is white Anglo-American from Michigan, and my father, I'm born for the Navajo Nation, Navajo through the Towering House Clan and the Black Streaked Woods people. And as we move to the panel section now, I wanted to say what connected me to the different people here is how I myself was brought up on mainly in the East Coast, but I I was born in Tonanez Dizi. I'm learning Navajo, and it was learning about on the news and the stories that in many ways I was like a lot of you who are probably in here who you weren't brought up hearing the stories about Bears Ears, but I was sort of went to the land and wanted to learn more because for so long, because of different trauma and historical intergenerational trauma and different reasons, my father went to boarding school, his mother went to boarding school, and before that, his grandmother came from the Long Walk, forced to Fort Sumner, and my grandparents died of cancer. They drank from a well that had uranium in it. So, and there was the Church Rock uranium mill spill in 1979 that not many people know about, right across the road from where my family are from. And many people in my family have survived or died from cancer or diabetes. And diabetes is also, in my family, often developed because we drink Coke every day and eat fry bread every day. That we learned how to make on the long walk, after the long walk in Fort Sumner. So this is where it resonated with me. I appreciate Angelo saying it's connecting as well the impacts of when we're being removed or pushed away without even moving because of how we treat or how we're distanced from the lands. That it was a Kanaka Maoli scholar who taught me to say, I greet you from my mountain to your mountain, my river to your river. So I am trying to learn more of that, how we occupy space, and that's what initiated this effort to hear these voices, to learn more from legal aspects, from community development aspects, from growing up in that area as well. Some of our panelists grew up in that area. So let's begin first hearing from Najon, and then Catherine, and then Mika, and finally James Singer. Najon.
So that's way over there. Okay, so I have a PowerPoint because, attorney. And I don't know who's turning it on. Oh, there we go. So I really appreciate watching Angelo's film. It's a pleasure and honor to work in the same office as him, and with such talent and with such insights into a cause that I knew little about, largely because my head was in books studying the law, and then afterwards studying for the bar, which really, you forget what happens, you don't notice what's happening on in your own world. I went back to law school. I am a social worker and an educator. And I one day woke up and said, you know what, it's time for me to go back to law school. I decided I needed to return and give back to my tribal communities, and found myself in law school. I am from the Fort Peck Sioux Assiniboine Reservation in Montana. My mother is from there, and my father is from the Navajo Nation. I grew up knowing much more about the Sioux culture, and so hearing about Bears Ears, it didn't quite hit me about what the significance was. My grandfather was a medicine man, so I understood the traditional aspects, the traditional knowledge, the culture that is so much a part of who we are every day as we go about living our lives. I strive and continue to strive to learn more about that Navajo culture and that Navajo teaching, and I feel it a pleasure to be able to work where I work that takes me down there among my people and among learning the teachings, and what's awesome is I get paid for it. What is truly unique, though, is really getting to know the stories of my people. Not knowing many of the creation stories while I was growing up, I recognized them as truth. I recognized the strength in the people that I began to become acquainted with. I became acquainted with the landscape that I had only visited as a child, yet I could still feel those strong feelings that I had when I would visit. Whether it was, I have two homelands, one in Montana and one on the Navajo Nation. It's something I chose to share with my family. I was just there this weekend, and that's my husband and I and my daughter as we enjoy the beautiful, striking landscape. It's also a shameless plug for BYU Law, which is my alma mater. If you haven't heard, there is, for Indigenous people, we do have a connection to our homeland. I'm not quite sure why it's inherent or if it's genetically passed on, but there is truly something significant about that as you visit and you step. It's something just speaks to the soul, to the very inner points of you. As I drive through the landscape that I became also home to in my homeland here, it just helps renew the strength that I have to go forward into the living of everyday life. There are challenges that we face. We have there are tragedies going on in the world. There are things that bring us down. But by connecting to that land, that gives you strength to go on. And like many Navajos, whether we lived in this place and got to see the Bears Ears on a daily basis or not, there is a connection. It brings us there, Just a little bit about where I work. I am not here. The views I express are my own and mine alone, although I do work for Utah Dine Bikea. I only share the insights that I have gained by observing and being among them and seeing the magnificent work that they do. In the Navajo language, Dine Bikea means sacred land, people's sacred lands, and we are a non-profit organization. This is very confusing to many in the public because they confuse us with the tribes, because we work to elevate the tribal voice and because we work closely with those tribal nations and provide advice, consulting, technical support. It's very common for that to be mistaken, and so I want that to be very clear that we are a nonprofit organization full of very talented people, myself included. This is who we are. This is who I have grown to respect and learn more about as our board members, who had a vision, who had a desire to protect land most sacred to them. They came together, and there was just something common about what they had. And you've heard several times in Angelo's film and in his talk about healing. And that is something that's really struck me from the very beginning, is because there is healing. There is a need for healing in that community. There is a need for healing in society. There is a need for healing amongst the tribal nations and the federal government. And this was the path that they chose, and chose to have hope in, chose to believe in, and chose to take action for. And so these are our board members that I get to go actually have meetings with. They're fantastic. And just so you know, when they began their work, it was several years ago. There was really no invitation for a Native voice, Native perspective in the way lands are managed and just public lands just in general, and specifically in San Juan County. They formed and they had strategy sessions, they planned, had advisors and consultants to help them figure out this foreign language of land management with BLM and federal agencies. They were determined, and they had hope. They wanted their voices to be heard. As many things do in Native culture, we begin with our elders. We look to them. They have wisdom to share. They have the knowledge. And so they went to their elders. They asked them what was important to them. They recorded it. They collected information. They researched policies. They researched publicly available information out there. And they came up with a proposal that they wanted to put forward in order to protect the land that was dear to them, for their children, for their children's children, for future generations. That happened over about 3 years. They facilitated a joint planning agreement with the Navajo Nation and San Juan County. 2012. That's 5 years ago. This did not happen overnight. They worked with them, came up with some good plans and a proposal. San Juan County didn't have anything comparable when Rob Bishop began his PLI process, and that was another way that they still tried to work collaboratively with everyone involved in order to have their vision heard, yet their voices were still not heard. And when that did not happen, they turned it over to the tribes. They went to their tribal leaders, they went to their governments, and found others who supported them. They helped the tribes come together, and the tribes formed the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, of which Utah Dine Bakay, I think, was proud to be working with and supporting with. But it was not, the decisions were no longer in their hands of what was happening. They were glad to be a part of it, though. And just to, striking landscape, you can't have a PowerPoint without just some of these fantastic sites. And we continue to work in partnership with tribes. And on December 28th, 2016, Bears Ears National Monument was designated, which was fantastic. And as you saw in Angelo's video, they celebrated. And it was a celebration, food and all. And I think above everything that I find most notable is the fact that they continued to stand united. They were supported by the tribes Angelo mentioned in his video, the National Congress of American Indians, other tribes, resolutions, and support. It means a lot. I'm always humbled whenever I go out to meet other tribal leaders or just even at the gas station, and there's somebody who is Native and they say, "Bears Ears, good job." And I'm like, yeah. We continue to help work and support them. And if you believe this earth is Mother Earth, like many of us Indigenous people do, including myself, You cannot deny the bond between mother and her child. This is my child this last weekend. This is what it's about. Bears Ears is magnificent. It is very moving when you go visit there, whether you grew up there or not, whether you had a connection to begin with or not. It doesn't matter. It is there. And we want it preserved for our future, for our children's future, for everyone's future, for future generations, for everyone. And again, BYU Wow.
And I feel bad that to give some slack to the U here. My sister Heather, who's an alumni of the University of Utah Law School, she was a big part in helping organize all this, and I did not mean to leave her out here as well. So yeah, Heather.
And I do want to say I love the youth. I do love the youth, but it was ironic that I was wearing my BYU Loft this weekend and it's up there. But yeah, sorry.
All right, Catherine, are you gonna hear from you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Bolzowski. I'm an attorney with the Navajo Nation Department of Justice in Window Rock, Arizona, where I traveled from leaving my house at 4:30 a.m. this morning. So. But it's an honor to be here. I serve at the pleasure of our Attorney General, Ethel Branch. As Najon talked about, I'm here today representing the Navajo Nation, which has been a part of the designation of Bears Ears Monument since the beginning, whether it be through our citizens or through our government or officials supporting the designation. And I am going to just briefly talk about a little bit about the Antiquities Act because someone has to talk about the boring lawyer stuff, and that will be me. So I just, as Najon talked about a little bit about the process that, and as Angela's film illustrated, the process that UDB and the tribes went through to get the designation. I just want to talk about the Antiquities Act, which is what is the legal authority that President Obama used to designate the monument. And the Antiquities Act was passed in 1906, and it's an old statute. And basically what it does is that it is a grant from Congress to the president to designate public lands as national monuments. And it's an older act, and it gives very broad authority to the president. And so it was under this act, oh, thank you. So it was under this act that Obama authority came from when it set aside this land. Oh, yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I did want to show it.
So I didn't know,
Yeah.
It's not connected up there. Thank you.
Okay. There we go. Okay, sorry. So this is the Antiquities Act. And, you can go back really quickly. And so as you can see, the main part that a lot of people look to when they're talking about it is what is the president supposed to designate? He's supposed to designate areas that are historical or significant historical and scientific value. And that's what Obama did in his proclamation. Unlike national parks, which are created by Congress through legislation and have very specific, there's very specific designations and rules that are set up for when something is a national park. National monuments are different. They're dependent on the proclamation that's issued. So for instance, Bears Ears National Monument, the proclamation that Obama signed back in December 2016, it lays out very specific reasons for the proclamation, and it also preserves certain rights for the Native people who were part of this process. It preserves the rights for hunting and gathering, and it also creates what's called a commission. And this Bears Ears Commission is made up of tribal representatives, and it's an advisory commission to the federal agencies that oversee the national monument. And this is unique because other monuments, that were created by proclamation don't have the same commission in it. So this is something that's unique. So it's interesting because if you look, for instance, Bandelier National Monument has a very different proclamation than Bears Ears, and that's something that distinguishes it from national parks. Some of them contain similar language. For instance, almost all national monuments allow for grazing to continue and for mining claims that were existent prior to the monument being designated to remain valid. So in this instance, when we talk about the Bears Ears National Monument, we're talking specifically about, the Obama proclamation, and in that his not only acknowledgement of the importance of this area to the indigenous people, but also his protection, the protection that he granted to the people to continue to use the land in traditional ways, and also giving them a voice in how the land is going to be managed by the federal government. And also one thing to note is that the Antiquities Act can only protect land that's already held by the federal government. So one of the discussions that we hear is that this was a land grab, that these monuments are land grabs, but the idea is that you can't designate private land as a monument. You can only designate land that the government already holds as a monument. So usually you'll move it from one governmental status to another governmental status. And so in this way, there's no private interests that are necessarily being affected by these designations. Since 1906, 16 presidents have used the act to designate national monuments. An interesting fact is that the Grand Canyon was actually originally designated as a national monument prior to it becoming a national park. Again, one of the critiques that you may hear about the designation of Bears Ears is that it's too big. It doesn't have, it's only supposed to be for small archaeological sites. That's not traditionally how this act has been used by presidents. It's been used and the plain language of the act clearly states for scientific or historical purposes. And so when the Grand Canyon was a national monument, the proclamation that was issued specifically stated it was being designated a national monument because of its extreme scientific value and its unique geological uniqueness. So there is precedent for this Bears Ears designation, and the Bears Ears area also contains a significant amount, not just of scientific value, but also massive amounts of historical value and archaeological sites. So it's really the best of both worlds because it's protecting all of these things. And so what can you do in a national monument? You can do a lot of the same things that you can do in a national park: camping, hunting, horseback riding. It really just depends on the management plan that the federal agency that's overseeing that monument puts into place. So just because you have a national monument doesn't necessarily mean that certain things are going to be prohibited. What you would look to, you would look to the proclamation to see exactly what's going to be prohibited. So for instance, in Obama's proclamation, he said no new mining claims, right? So we're not going to have any new mining claims in Bears Ears. But he doesn't specifically say, no horseback riding or no wood gathering. Actually, he specifically says you can continue to gather wood on the Bears Ears monument. And so the next step will be for the federal agencies, in this case the BLM, to come up with a management use plan on how they see the monument use, whether that means certain ATVs, where ATVs will be able to go, where people will be able to hike and whatnot. And so this is another aspect, to these monuments, and that's why the Bears Ears Commission is such an important part, because they will have a voice. They will have a voice in how the monument will be used moving forward. All right, next. I already talked about that. Great. So some of the opposition to the use of the Antiquities Act, again, was that maybe the Bears Ears monument was not the smallest area. But as Najon said, the designation of the Bears Ears monuments was started back in, I believe, 2009. Is that correct?
Oh, you're asking me to.
We're lawyers. We're bad with numbers. But 3 to 4 years of research went into into researching the monument and the area that was eventually included into the monument. And so, for the Navajo Nation, we believe that this was the smallest area that could have been designated in order to protect our interests, both in the historical and the environmental aspects of the monument. And that's it. We'll pass it on. Thank God. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Mika, I'm just going to quickly introduce her too, is I met Mika as I was the Charles Eastman Fellow at Dartmouth, and she's a current student at Dartmouth who grew up in the San Juan County area, went to school in Blanding, and her family is also like Angelo, from this region where a lot of the tensions have been. And I've been following her on social media, Facebook, and was really impressed by her writing, her expressions of that, and I'm just glad she could come all the way from the East Coast here to join us tonight. So, yeah.
Hi everyone. Yad she Micah Asant ko Higlini Daniels Junior Shed ko Higlini Nishlin Natlana Bashishin Ashte Edashiche Adobe Lagana Dashanale. So my name is Micah Daniels, and as Farina said, I am a current student at Dartmouth College. I'm majoring in Native American Studies with a minor in education, and I guess a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about to you all is just sort of maybe grounding a little bit of this process of how the Bears Ears kind of came into play, and sort of, being there in San Juan County at the time of all of this happening, and as Kathleen and Joan have pointed out, that this is not something that happened overnight, that this is something that has happened since I was in middle school. This is something that has been happening since my younger sister was, starting Head Start or something. So this is not something that has and this is something that has also started way beyond, historically speaking, any of us, before any of us were even here. So I guess where I would like to start in sort of my talking. I'm sorry if I'm stuttering and jumping around. I'm really nervous. This is my first time talking to people. But anyway, so I guess where I want to start is just thinking about how and when and the time frame for when settlization or colonial settlement happened in southern Utah. And Blanding is not a very old community. It is a community that is maybe 160 years old at most. And thinking back about that, I would like to recognize and reiterate, that colonization is not an event. It is not something that happened in the past. It is not something that is over and people just need to get over what happened. Bears Ears is very much, and the designation of the monument is very much a manifestation of being resistant to settler colonialism in today, now, and in the present time. And so if I'm talking and if it seems as if I'm coming at you, I am, and I am in general. And I'm also holding myself to the same kind of standards, because being at a place like Dartmouth and realizing that I, and as well as every other person in this society, is a colonized being, takes a lot to accept. And to be able to decolonize yourself and to contextualize Bears Ears in a decolonized frame of mind takes a lot. And so here I am going back to when Blanding and the area was settled. There has been a culture in Blanding for treasure hunting, for going out, and it's a nice family bonding moment to go out and look at pottery and pick up pieces of pottery and look at the ruins and see all of the hieroglyphics and things. And so because the people in the area are so exposed to these artifacts and are so used to being around them, it's something that has been destigmatized and is now something that is commodified and can be exploited. And so there are homes in Blanding, Utah, where their foundations are built out of Anasazi ruins. That is how destigmatized these ruins are. And it is not just happening in Blanding, it is happening in the surrounding areas. So in 2009, when the FBI investigation Cerberus had happened, and there was the investigation started in 2008, and the bust in Blanding, Monticello, that area happened in 2009. And I think one of the major events that had happened and what made the news was there was a couple of suicides that had happened due to this bust. But what people don't talk about and what people don't reflect on is how there were 40,000 artifacts that were confiscated at that time by the federal government. 40,000. There were also over 100 counts of felony charges shared between a couple dozen to about 24 people. This is not a violence that is talked about. This is not a violence that is talked about against indigenous peoples, against all of the tribes that have those sacred ties to Bears Ears. And it was in 2009 that the conversation had started in terms of what are we going to do to protect this land? What are we doing? How are we going to stop this sort of violence against indigenous peoples? And so I think that, you know, being in that community, being in high school at the time, and seeing people walk around in normal day in the grocery store, there are people walking around with Protect Bears Ears shirts with a big cross in the middle, and at the bottom they write "Burial Lives Matter," mocking the Bears Ears coalition, mocking the designation because of this Cerberus bust that had happened in 2009. And so growing up in that kind of environment where that institutional violence and that institutional racism is very much existent and you can feel it every day, you know, that is something that I think really needs to be brought up and needs to be talked about, because when we're talking about the layout of this conference being local matters, okay, if we're talking about making Bears Ears a local issue, making it so that a lot of the other tribes that are a part of the coalition don't have a say in how the Bears Ears is regulated and how the resources are monitored and how they are not giving any authority because they're not local. Okay, let's talk about what local means. And to me, local does not mean every citizen in San Juan County. To me, local means having those inherent ties to the land. Local means being indigenous, being there from time immemorial, not the past 100 years. Yes, there is a sense of connection that people can develop after generations of being in a place, but being of the land, being autochthonous of the land, that is something that you cannot exploit. That is not something that you can go out and treasure hunt about. So, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But anyway, going back to the Bears Ears and talking about how local matters. People in San Juan County, the majority of the people who are against the Bears Ears designation talk about how local matters. It needs to be a local issue. We need to put it up for referendum. We need to have a local vote about it. And one thing that I have a problem with about that is right now, if you didn't know, San Juan County is in violation of a federal court ordered to redistrict its voting districts. Because right now, San Juan County has been constantly silencing Native voices. And growing up, I thought it was a normal thing to have, oh yeah, there's that one county commissioner that's Navajo, or he's Native. That's so cool, that one guy, when there are 3 positions. But in all actuality, when you're thinking about putting it up for referendum and having a flawed system where there is always going to be a white majority vote for anything, then you are operating in a broken system where you are constantly silencing the voice of indigenous peoples, especially in San Juan County. Let's make it a local issue. First fix the voting districts. Do that first, because as of right now, the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission has that right to demand that of you because San Juan County, you are in violation of that federal order. But anyway, that's kind of what I have to say about that. Okay, I have a minute. But just to sort of close, if it sounds like I'm angry, I am, and I'm not going to be apologetic about it, because, as I said before, and as other panelists before me have pointed out, is that Bears Ears is a possibility for healing. And Bears Ears, for me, is a way of reclamation for Indigenous peoples and for Navajo, Zuni, Hopi, Ute, the Ute tribes that are in the area. Because one thing that people don't talk about is how big Bears Ears, how big of an issue this is. This is the first time in history tribes have ever had a say in monument regulation. This is history in the making. And with this executive order that may or may not be coming from Trump, this could completely change and destroy anything that could happen in the future for tribes, setting a precedent that ultimately takes away their right to their sacred lands and to regulate and to have a say in how those lands are monitored and how they're taken care of. So with my final minute, I'd just like to say thank you all for letting me rant at you. And if you have any questions, I welcome them when it's the Q&A time.
Yeah, thank you. And lastly, we will hear from James Singer, one of the co-founders of, and I want to get this correct, it's the Native American Voting Coalition in Utah?
It's a good
attempt? Okay, go ahead.
The Utah League of Native American Voters.
Okay,
yeah.
There we go. Go ahead, James. Thank you. Yeah.
It's great to be here and really quite privileged to be among the people of this group and to see this great film. My mother is white people from Cleveland, Ohio, and so you can't get more Midwestern American, right, than that, white American than that. And my father, he's from Cameron, Arizona, on the western side of the Navajo Nation. So my clans are Towering House, so Farina is my sister over here, and Salt Clan is my other grandfather. And I remember going and visiting grandmother and grandfather out there on Gray Mountain, and at a very young age, I was very aware of the differences from home here in Salt Lake City to my other home in Cameron. And I would see that, like we didn't drink grandma's water all the time because one time I did and I got super sick, right? And I noticed that there were large power lines that went from the Glen Canyon Dam out in Page that would pass by, sending electricity out towards Vegas and wherever else needed the electricity. But it was right there. It was right there past grandma's house. And I would be like, why this injustice? Why do I see this here? At a very early age, seeing the differences there. But then realizing, this is a blessing. This is we would look outside and see all of the stars. All of them, right? You could see the Milky Way. You could just see where Coyote Ma'i when he threw them up, when he threw the blanket up and put them all into its place. I'm like, there it is. You can see those different constellations. You can't see that here in Salt Lake. You can't see it in February, right? Because of the pollution. You can't see it. And this got me on my track, on my road to becoming a sociologist, mostly because of these early instances of seeing inequality, but also critiquing Western society and saying, it's not always the best way. Your way isn't always the best way, right? And so thinking of it from that context then, and looking at Bears Ears, and I'm watching the narratives here, right? I'm looking at the narrative. And I'm seeing how many of our allies, our white allies, in the dominant kind of discourse, in the dominant culture, how they're framing Bears Ears and how it's different. I mean, you make strange bedfellows when you're working on issues together, and you find commonalities. But as we could see very clearly from Angelo's documentary here, his film, that there is a spiritual aspect, that there's a connection. It is our kin, our keh, right? It is part of who we are. The land is something that we're connected to. It makes us who we are. And then I see commercials from like Patagonia and Black Diamond, like, this is the environmental playground where we can go and recreate and have a great time. Right? This is how it's been championed. And then we get a lot of our friends here in the dominant culture here is like, yes, I stand with you because it is terrible what those oil and gas companies are doing. It's terrible that they want to take that for profit. You know what? They're right. It is terrible because it was the same kind of industries that forced my grandfather into uranium mines all those years ago, when he would bring back his clothes covered in the yellow dust, at home, where my grandmother would go and wash these clothes in front of my dad. Right? What other choice do you have when the labor market only gives you those options? Right? And so you can see that maybe a lot of natives that are in that area are like, no, we need these kinds of things. We need jobs. We're suffering from such high unemployment and poverty rates. We need these kinds of things. And the environment's like, no. You're a native. You live with the land, right? It's like, okay, now you're conflating some of the stereotypes that you have about native people too. We still need that. We still need jobs. We still need things to make our societies progress. Right? But we want to be the ones in charge of it. And that's the difference. The difference is a question of sovereignty, a question of tribal sovereignty. We get to decide what we do with it. Right? If this is our land, we have in our ways, we talked about oil, that's the fat of Mother Earth. It is to be used, right? Maybe not in the ways that we see in a capitalist mode of production, but it's definitely something that we can be using. So along those lines then, I'm looking at this narrative, right? And we got this environmentalist kind of push on one side, and it completely co-opted what we were fighting about and what Angelo's film talks about, right? It was the same thing we saw up at Standing Rock 2. Same exact thing. The tribes up there were saying it is our choice whether we want an oil pipeline to go through here or not, and you're not letting us. You're not letting us. That is a violation of our sovereignty, our ability to make the choice, our self-identity. And then again, the people came up and they're saying, no, this is an environmental issue. Water is sacred. Yes, it is. But you're co-opting our phrases. Water is sacred to us. Water is sacred to us, right? Mother Earth. You don't call her Mother Earth. You don't treat her, unless you're treating your mom badly, right? You're not treating her how you should. You're co-opting our ways of thinking and our ways of being. And that's why when Bears Ears was designated as a national monument, and it's something that Mika also pointed out, which I thought was very important, is that this was something at a community level that we as indigenous people had put together, that we were driving this discussion. That is the power. That is the empowerment of this issue. That's what makes it such a pivotal moment going forward. Because we can look to this and say, look all over. We can come together as indigenous peoples and we can push this on a sovereignty issue. This is our sovereignty. This is who we are, right? So I think that that's what makes people so excited now. And being part of this community in Salt Lake, it gets people excited. It gets the natives here excited. It's like, yes, we go back and forth from our traditional lands down south. We come here to work, but we see we won. We won something. We won and we fought it, right? And our warriors look different, right? They're anthropologists, they're filmmakers, they're students at Dartmouth, they're assistant professors, they're lawyers who, yes, went to BYU Law School, right? This is what it looks like to fight in a 21st century. We are trying to switch narratives. We're trying to regain control of that. Not be the sideshow. Not be the footnote. Not be the forgotten statistic. Right? It is much more different than that. We can take control. That is what Bears Ears is about. Our taking control. And so I'm indeed very humbled and grateful to know several of these people who have worked and lived in the area and continue to fight that fight. And I stand by you, and I'm very honored to be in your presence. Thank you.
Thank you. right, so now we have some good time to engage in conversation with each other and address any questions as people can walk up one by one. There's a microphone on these two sides, and please try your best to pose a question. I know it's great to share comments, and we will be here afterwards to approach the panelists more interpersonally that way, but we would like a question to help engage more conversation. Thank you. All right, we'll start here on the left, please.
Would you please address how we, as also the guests upon the land, connect and make a difference? Because we do want to make a difference. So my specific question is, when we match anger at the atrocities that have gone on, when we are looking at the healing, how do we make a difference? Because we are not the local voice, but we are the voice that will help you. But tonight, we have no way to communicate to you other than through a microphone or maybe catch you after. We need a list of how do we make a difference. We need to have a way to communicate, because blending white residents do not represent all of us. And all of us are I am heritage of Native, Indigenous, Chinese. I do not look it, but in my heart and my soul and in my pedigree, I am. And I have watched this issue. One of the most powerful places I have stepped upon the land where the Indigenous people are memorialized is the Big Hole battlefield. It is powerful. And they finally worked with the people. So the current powers that be, I beg you, please bring what you have been working with for 9, 10 lifetimes, years, but it seems like time immemorial. You have to do the healing. You have to bring the ways that we can communicate and lend our support to you. Okay. Please bring that forward. Thank you. And I'm so thankful that you started to bring up, we're trying to understand, can the Iniquities Act be backed up and changed? We're grateful for the landmark that it is, but we want to help too. So if you can address any ways, we'll make notes, or we'll get on a list, or whatever we can do.
Right. Thank you. It sounds like you had a couple questions and comments there. Any thoughts anyone want to address first?
I might have one little one. Just in terms of our organization may have some ideas, and if you want to, join mailing list, there are things that we do to communicate with you. Always just donating and helping, volunteering individual time to the cause, I think helps. There are several other organizations out there that help individual causes like this, that bring your voice forward and bring that aspect of what you desire to express to those who are fighting this cause. But yes, go to our website, which is utah.nabakea.org.
Contact your local representatives, please.
Yeah, and do what, though? It's wonderful to say contact a local representative, but what do you say to make a difference?
I would
We'll vote them out.
Just express your support for Bears Ears, and express your support for all the groups and the people that are working on it, because I think that's especially as non-natives, all we can do is support the work that they're doing and be in solidarity.
All right, I will take one on this side and then go back to that. Yes, sir.
This question is principally for Ms. Belsalski, and Ms. Meza can certainly comment as according to her awareness. But I'm interested in the co-management commission. Could you speak to the any successes and any challenges that have happened, because it's obviously been a short period of time, yes, and there's concern that it might not continue. Could you speak to anything and everything that you know about it?
Okay. So, I mean, some of the issues has just been a lot of the uncertainty that has surrounded the monument in general. The tribes have all moved forward with the commission. They've named their representatives, and they have started meeting. The commission meets on a regular basis to talk about, you know, their vision for management of Bears Ears and how they would like to see the federal government manage it, including talks about traditional knowledge and how to preserve that and further that. But I would say the biggest hurdle right now is that the uncertainty around the future of Bears Ears and the current administration's unwillingness to meet with the commission and to really acknowledge it and work with it and move forward with it. Anything? Did I miss anything?
Sounds like you got it.
Okay.
All right. We'll go to this side for your question.
Hi. I have a question for all of you, so whoever would like to answer may. At a time when particularly people of color feel like we're kind of under attack, I'm wondering what kind of lessons or what lessons would you give to other groups of color who are also victims of colonialism and are also struggling with, you know, how do we become successful in the way that the 5 tribes were with Bears Ears? And I'm saying beyond kind of signing up for an email list, like what lessons were learned that other groups can also learn from? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You want to go ahead, Angela? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I've done a lot of work with coalition building in New York City, with amongst many other groups of minorities and marginalized communities, and all the way with folks from the United Nations. And what I've witnessed is that collaboration and cooperation in a collective sense is much more effective than it is individually or alone. So I think the real power is, how can you listen, first of all? I think that's going back to this woman's question as well, is like, number one is listening and being respectful in that listening. And this is a skill that takes a lifetime to learn. I'm still struggling with it. So we can all do better in one, listening respectfully, and also, 2, I think being able to do whatever it is that you have the capacity and power to do. So what we find is that because of the diversity of the people in these collectives, we see that each of them has a strength. And they know what that strength is inside and out because they're close to it. And we let them use their strength. And if there are leaders there, especially like indigenous leaders and from our communities, let them lead, support them, be there for them. What do you need? How can I help you? What is it that I can do for you? Because they're already having the plan, they're already having the knowledge, they're already in the seat to take the movement forward wherever that needs to be. So I think there is a great hope for not just people of color, but for everybody to listen and to figure out what their strengths are, to lend, to help people move forward.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think a really great point that Angela makes is about, we live in a society based on individualism. And there is a notion to atomize us or hyper-individualize everyone. It's so much easier to break us apart and get us focused on some other kind of goal or other kind of thing to distract us, like buying clothes. You need to consume. You need to be part of the society. And we tend to forget the very basic connections that we have with our communities and our society. So I would also add to what Angela was talking about, is that when we look at how communities of color, what is our long-term goal? We can look at, oh yeah, we gotta get someone out of office. Yeah, well, that's it. That's what we'll go around. I think it's a good goal. But long-term, what is it we're looking for? Are we looking for the same kind of consumatory behaviors that our white peers have? Do we want to be able to be just as individualistic and normal as they? Or do we want to move beyond that and liberate not just ourselves, but our white brothers and sisters as well? Free them from this system of oppression that pushes us aside, that breaks everyone up and says that we have to be in competition with each other all the time, that I have to exploit you, I have to exploit your labor power, I have to exploit your antiquities and your culture and your ideas for my own gain. And we have to move beyond that and say, we can't survive in a society like that. We already know that we are reaching the end of our natural resources and we're destroying things. We have to move beyond that. And we as community of colors, as communities of color, I think we can find common ground with that. We live among so many of our LDS brothers and sisters here, our Mormon brothers and sisters, who, for example, love the land. The stewardship as part of a doctrinal basis. We must be stewards of the land. And we can turn to them and say, you've done a terrible job. Let us help teach you. We've been here since time immemorial, before time has existed. Let us teach you how to work this land. And there needs to be the humility of our Mormon brothers and sisters to say, you know what, you're right. We don't know everything. Although we do have the one true religion, we don't know how to be good stewards of this land, right? And in that way, we are all becoming liberated, I think. So speaking to that specifically.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, you want to add a comment? Go ahead, Nisha.
So my comment's probably just more general, and the fact is, Indigenous people in this aspect have been very resilient. You either survive or you surrender, and a lot of what's happened in the past. That's kind of the basis, even today. And I think that resilience, that they're still here, that they still have their cultural foundations, their traditions, speaks power. And I believe that comes from like a hope. Anyone can have hope. You have to have faith. You believe, even when there are doubts, you continue to believe. You find others who believe with you. You draw strength from one another, and you continue to go forward. And even when it gets hard, you just, again, find that inner strength to continue and find someone else who can help add to that. And I think that's just a universal principle in no matter what it is that you do. But I think specifically with communities of color that we need to find strength from one another.
Go ahead.
Hi. So just to sort of address your question, I think to kind of go back to something that I had said before is looking at decolonizing and what does that mean, and especially, and not just for Indigenous peoples, but looking at decolonization in terms of what it means to Black Americans, what it means to Hispanics, what it means to Latinx people. And I think one commonality that all of the people of color share, and especially in a global context, is colonization. That colonization happened in South Africa. It happened in all of Africa, the continent, the whole continent. It happened in South America. It happened here. It happened in Canada. And so these are all, so imperialism didn't just happen here in the U.S. and didn't just happen here in Utah in the Southwest. It happened everywhere. And I think like finding those commonalities, finding how each community has been disadvantaged, looking at the statistics and how just looking at the income gap and how that income gap in education is also correlated with race and ethnicity, and just seeing those commonalities and being able to communicate with other communities and say, we have a similar experience in colonization. We have all seen and these institutions that were put in place back when it happened are still in place now. So colonization, and realizing that it's not an event, it's a process, and being able to communicate that across communities and seeing those commonalities and how that has manifested in each community, and how a lot of the time it's really similar. Being able to connect with other communities in that way, I think is sort of what I think maybe you're trying to get at, is just being open and maybe even just to the point of inviting other people of color to your events, to your community, and just showing them how similar these statistics can be. And so anyway, that's just what I'd say. I will reach out. I try to reach out. I'll try to go to other people's things and their events and their, cultural sharing kind of things. So I think just being able to communicate and learn about each other in that sense.
All right, we have a question over here on this side. What do you like?
Hello, my name's Clayton. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your perspectives. I guess my question is going to be lame in comparison to the better ones. I was just curious, who holds the existing oil and gas leases at Bears Ears? And with the Antiquities Act, how does that affect the management of those leases? That's all. Thanks.
You know?
Lawyers?
I know, we get all the fun questions. Oil and gas leases can be held by different individuals. So, under the Oil and Gas Act, individuals can take different claims. So I'm not exactly sure all the different people who hold oil and gas leases. If they perfected their oil and gas claim prior to the establishment of the monument, they can move forward with the extraction of that. But any oil and gas leases that hadn't been perfected prior to the monument were extinguished by the proclamation. So kind of, I don't know, / it depends, I guess, as a typical lawyer answer is, But to my understanding, I don't believe that there are any oil and gas leases that were perfected prior to in that area prior to the proclamation. Does Joan have a better idea?
Well, in my preparations, I really wasn't going over those details for this.
Sure.
So I'm not prepared to comment on that right now.
Okay. Well, thank you.
But that's an important question. Thank you. I know you were in line next, so we'll go with your question and then come to this side. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to make sure you know I am a Mormon and I don't know everything. So. A lot of us don't. But my question is, I know in the video you talk about having success working with the previous administration, and I'm just wondering if any of that success is continued with the current administration, or so I believe the legislation that they talk about is pretty safe, like there's not much danger of that getting affected by the current administration, or if there is, and just if there's any other causes that maybe the current administration could use some needs to be working with, or is threatening that I might not know about. So.
So there's a big difference between the administrations. So I would have to say that, yeah, it's a little bit different in working with them. The other part, I completely forgot the other part of your question.
No, we were like, shoot, you went down too fast. I think it was, it went by fast. Could you repeat that really quick? Sorry.
Is there any
Go ahead.
Any other causes that I might not know about that are being threatened, or?
He wants to know what's the risk now? It's like Bears Ears and how it's different.
So I do think that in terms of this administration, you are seeing a lot of different rules change and that affect land management, and within the Department of Interior, as well as things within Indian country, because everything within the Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, the way they handle things, and so under the current administration, it is quite a bit different.
And then you can share your question on this side.
All right. Thank you very much for a great panel and everyone sharing all their thoughts. My question is about, we've seldom recognized that there's very sophisticated cultures and civilizations that have been on this continent since time immemorial. And I'm just curious, if you had one thing that you wanted the Utah delegation and the Trump administration to hear about what we should all learn from Native American cultures and tribes, and perhaps something that we might lose if Bears Ears Monument is taken away and tribal voices are forever suppressed, what would that thing be?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. First, I would just like to say that Indigenous peoples are not going anywhere, so we're not going to lose anything, first of all. And second of all, with this past Monday being Indigenous Peoples Day, the one thing that I would say to anybody is to thinking about Indigenous Peoples Day and acknowledging your positionality, especially in terms of what Angelo had opened with, is understanding that you and I are guests here on this piece of land here because it is Ute land, and to understand that every institution, as I feel like I'm sorry, but as every institution that has been put in place is still in place, there's still the violence of silencing Indigenous peoples. And so what I would ask President Trump or any other person that wanted to know is that our ancestors are the ones that survived. And that's scary to think about, because if you think about it in that way, then that's a burden on your shoulders, as in when you're going to school, when you're becoming a business owner, when you're doing all of these things, you are carrying the well-being of your community on your back. And that is something that a lot of people don't acknowledge or know about, that your survival and your being, you as an Indigenous person are the physical manifestation of your ancestors' strengths and their hopes and their prayers. And acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday and having that be the theme of what we are and what we hope to be is something that I would ask people to look at and see that Indigenous peoples are not just here and now and maybe possibly lost in the future, but what we do and what we have done in the present time is something that our descendants are going to be looking back on. And so it's not something that ends.
I also want to say how much, when I brought up like my connections of intergenerational historical trauma and different things, that reflecting on Bears Ears was, I kept thinking like, I didn't get to hear a lot of Navajo stories because my ancestors were taught their language was useless, that it was bad. That was, a form of violence of trying to just eradicate everything, Dine about them, that I wouldn't learn, the Navajo language, or I wouldn't learn about Canolta or, these different ceremonies or what the land meant. And it was distancing that connection, like trying to eradicate that Indigenous identity that even when I eventually decided, as I told you, that I am Atsa Dine, if I identify as that, that's like, that existence is already standing up to, as was shared, surviving and standing up to all the forces that are still trying to, eradicate these ties to the land. So if you allow Bears Ears, for example, to be open to being dug up or ripped apart, blown away for whatever purpose, you're destroying an archive, you're destroying a church to some. I mean, it's not fully able to be translated, but to try and convey that, me being able to go to that land and to find reconnection, it's through the land that I am reconnecting to that land. So I just hope people who are trying to wrap their head around all these dynamics are understanding how it's a lot of reorienting and reconnecting ourselves to the lands and how it's a part of who we are. That when you destroy those lands, it's that ongoing process of colonization to eradicate, indigeneity, the ties to the land. All right, and you have a point. Yeah.
I feel like I should know this answer, so I'm going to try. So I think that any action taken on this national monument and anything that we lose an opportunity, the Bears Ears National Monument Proclamation has within law the integration of traditional knowledge. The traditional knowledge is a key aspect to managing these lands and working in close cooperation with the federal agencies. This is something that indigenous people have known for centuries, that they've been able to take care of the land in a way that they relate with the land in a way that has sustained it for a long time. Don't want to, get too technical in terms, but for a very long time. That is a lost opportunity for the rest of the world to really understand that, so that we can really learn land management in the way that sustains it naturally. I have to admit, property law was the hardest class in law school because of that concept and how we do that. And being able to inform those land managers through the collaborative structure of the tribal commission is a fantastic opportunity that would be lost, as well as the ability of the hope that those who would be serving and helping those land management agencies to have faith to go forward in the youth, knowing that is what they are also sharing, and that it is valued and it can be used to help everyone. And so I think that would be a very sad opportunity for us to lose.
Because of time, we only have time for one last question, and there's a madam who is waiting here. We'll take it, and then please, if you have any other questions with us, please come up and engage with us, because we only have a minute left.
Hi, my name is Yvette Toole. I am a member of the Shoshone-Bannock Tribes, and as a graduate student of University of Utah, I want to welcome you here to Salt Lake. I also want to welcome you here to our land, the Shoshonean people, because this is also our land here. I also want to congratulate you all for coming here and speaking on this issue. This case has been very closely watched by a lot of other tribes. We are in support of the efforts that these tribes have made to work together. I want to also acknowledge that a lot of the tribes did not historically get along. I think that the strategy of finding those commonalities has been very effective, and I think that it's something that we all are very worried about. Realistically, politically, we live in a very scary situation. We have a president who has not clearly identified an Indian policy, and we literally don't know what will be coming out of DC on a daily basis. I hate to say it, sometimes an hourly basis. I think couple of comments. One is I'm glad to see that you have a commission, a board. I'm curious to see how effective that is going to be in working with the federal land managers. And two, do you have a strategy for trying to overcome the changes to the Antiquities Act, which really is very, very worrisome, as that has a tremendous ability to impact historic properties throughout the United States?
I don't know. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Are you referring to the proposed changes by Representative Bishop to the Antiquities Act?
Yep.
So I believe both all the tribes have issued statements about it in regards to the proposed changes. We do not support Representative Bishop's proposed changes to the act. This would be a great time to call your representative if you are in Congressman Bishop's district and let him know you also do not support changes to the Antiquities Act. But at this time, the tribes are monitoring the proposed legislation closely and are active in commenting and opposing it.
Right. Well, we are out of time right now, and I really want to thank everyone for coming, for the sponsors, and for this very important conversation that I hope can, please continue these conversations, continue seeking and listening, and reaching out and building these connections. Thank you, and this was live streamed as well, so thank you to all those wherever you are. Thank you.